So, if any of you have guessed, based off of anything that I've said over the last few weeks, is that we are, after our little Resurrection Sunday celebration last week, and a little. Celebrating the Passover and our Seder dinner and all that good stuff, right? Last week we heard the tale of two gardens, the Garden of Eden and the Garden of Gethsemane, what happened. Total nonstop action-packed stuff, right? So now we resume back into our study and our walk through the Minor Prophets. And this week, and probably for the next several weeks, we are doing, anybody guess what book? Hosea. All right, so this is the little bit of surprise I got for you guys, that we are bringing back question and answer. Question and answer, Q&A. That's right, short interrogation by the pastor. So before we get started in Hosea chapter 1, I've got some questions for you. All right, and as always, I will post these on Facebook and put them on our new website, which is legit, right? So that next week when we come back, before we start next week, we'll have some discussion on question and answer. So today we are going through the first two chapters of Hosea. So first question is, first question, anybody need a Bible? Anybody walk in without their sword? No problem, we are heavily equipped. All right, first question. In chapter 1, what did Hosea's marriage to Gomer represent? In chapter 1, right? This will be the first question. So write it down, script it. Yeah, I know, she's ready. She's pulling the trigger. She's like, oh, I already read. I studied up. Yeah, she's trying to get all the Snickers bars I pass out for the right answers, right? Okay. So, question 2 will also pertain to chapter 1. What was God judging Israel for? As scripted in Hosea chapter 1, okay? So next week don't come back and go, oh, the Lord's judgment on Israel was XXXX. It's all about what's in Hosea. And I will even give you a hint on this one, okay? It can be found in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. It can be found in the book of 1st and 2nd Kings. But, all right, question 3, chapter 2. What did God make for us in the valley of Acre? Is that my mic making all that? All right, hold on. Yeah, that's not any better, is it? Yeah, can you edit that out? Oh. I might just clip it to my lip, dude. Look, Chuck's back there going, that'll work. All right, question number 4. After today, so when we come back next week, this will be the most pertinent and important question. What did you learn in chapters 1 and 2 of Hosea that you didn't know before? So those are your 4 questions. So next week when we come back, before we start and do anything, we will talk about these questions. Everybody good? All right. All right, if you would, turn with me in your Bibles to chapter 1 of Hosea. Now, Hosea is quite a character. This is quite a guy. There's not a whole lot of information about the prophet Hosea out there. We just know that he was, 8th century BC, sometime probably around 730, 740 BC, something like that. Now, unlike the other prophets that we've already talked about and studied, he is not from the south. He is from the north kingdom. So we start in verse 1. The word of the Lord came to Hosea, the son of Beeri. In the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel. So we're talking about Jeroboam, not the original, right? Not the OG Jeroboam, not the one who originally split the kingdom, right? This is Jeroboam 2.0. Okay? This Jeroboam, he's about, what, 10 generations down from the first Jeroboam. So I know we've talked about him in our other studies in the Minor Prophets, but we can look at all the names of the kings in the time of Judah, so we can see right around the time that Hosea was. So this is what I like about Hosea. Hosea don't beat around the bush. He gets right to it. He gets right to it because the word of the Lord is hard for this guy. It is a hard word. When the Lord first spoke through Hosea, the Lord said to Hosea, "Go and take yourself a wife of whoredom." Yeah. Well, alrighty then is right. Some versions say of prostitution. Some versions say of adultery. Okay, either way, no matter the implication, it is go take yourself a wife that is deeply embedded in sexual sin. Yeah, that's what I always dreamed of, Lord. But there's something about Hosea, the character and the faithfulness of Hosea, is he is like, okay. And he does it. It says, "And have children of whoredom. And the land commits great whoredom by forsaking the Lord. So he went and took Gomer, a daughter of that guy, and she conceived him and bore him a son." So he has son number one. And the Lord said, "Call his name Jezreel. For in just a little while I will punish the house of Jehu for the blood of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. And on that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel." Now, I'm not saying that there's an answer to one of the questions there, but verse 6, "She conceived again and bore a daughter, and the Lord said, Call her name," and in the ESV it just gives the meaning of her name, "No Mercy. For I will no more have mercy on the house of Israel to forgive them at all, but I will have mercy on the house of Judah." So we say that this is judgment specific to the north kingdom, but forgiveness will come for the south and Judah. "And I will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them by bow or sword or by war or by horses or by horsemen." When she had weaned no mercy, she conceived and bore a son, and the Lord said, "Call his name not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not your God. Yet the number of children of Israel shall be like sand of the sea, which cannot be measured or numbered. And that place where it was said to them, You are not my people, it shall be said to them, Children of the living God, and the children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together, and they shall appoint themselves one head, and they shall go up from the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel." So when we look at this, we see that there is judgment coming on Israel, and we see this word, Jezreel, named several times. And this is actually, well, you guys will study it out and you'll come back and answer the question. But the whole thing is that this is judgment because of this guy Jehu. And when we look at that, and we go back and we look in 1st and 2nd Kings, we're not going to go there because I don't want to soak up that much time in this. All right, this guy he was a king. And God put him on mission to do something, but he went nuts with it. This guy, he went out of control and did things all out of God's order. So God is looking at this and is saying, all right, here's what's going to happen because of this. But when we look at this and God says, man, I need you to name your children these kind of not so nice things. You know, you are not my people. Like, what does your name mean? My name means I am not God's people. Like, okay, I am not going to hang out with you. Not at all. And what's your name mean? Oh, my sister, over here, her name is No Mercy. No mercy from the Lord at all. I'd be like, all right, so you guys, we will not be hanging out together at all. But this is tough because what this really represents is Hosea's relationship here is really representing Israel's relationship with God. And we go, man, and for us, it should make us stop here for a moment and go, is my relationship with the Lord really what it should be? Yeah. Now, reading through a lot of text, extra biblical text, and reading different historians and Bible scholars, I've read here that some people are saying, well, Gomer probably wasn't necessarily in the ring of prostitution or something like that prior to her marriage to Hosea. And some say it was. Now, some say that this wasn't actually that it was more about, that this was symbolic of idol worship, that this was symbolic of idolatry. So either way, the point is it doesn't really matter what it was. What matters is the fact that it's representative in showing that the people's hearts are not right, and that the relationship with God is not what it should be, is not what God intended for our relationship to be with Him. So this is just an absolute mess. See, unlike the other minor prophets that we've gone through so far, where the prophet was just an unpopular guy in the sense that the Lord gave him, Holy Spirit download, and he comes up to a king or to some super whack priest and says, hey, I've got a message from you for the Lord, and it's typically not pretty good. It's kind of a message of doom. Hosea also referred to sometimes as a prophet of doom. But Hosea is different in the fact that God puts on him and says, all right, I'm not just going to give you a message to preach. I'm not just going to tell you, hey, this is what you should be telling the people. He's like, I'm going to make an example for the people around you to see that this is what it's like. But Hosea is up for the task, whether he really wanted to be or he really did not want to be. He's up for the task, and he does this because we see they bore a few children. So he's faithful all the way to the point of maybe where he doesn't necessarily want to be faithful. Now, what's really tough about this, when I look at this, is I go, not only is this kind of representative of the people, the condition of the hearts of the people and their relationship with God, what this also represents is that God is like the father of a house, of children that he has no relationship with, and that he has no provision for. Man, again, just talking about earlier, my visit with my dad this week, it would be a pretty tough thing to walk into his house and the first thing he say is, yeah, you're not my son and I am not your father. Well, that would be kind of indicative of going, well, I think maybe my relationship with him isn't where it's supposed to be. But when we notice this, if we looked at this right here, what we would notice is that God doesn't just say this not just because he's mad. He doesn't say this just because he feels like it, or just because we're bad, or there's some people who are good. All right, we're talking about the nature of God, who, if you want to understand what mercy is, you look at the nature of God, and you will understand what mercy is. When you want to understand what love is, you look at the nature of God, and you'll fully understand what love is. But see, what this is more, when we look at words like prostitution, we look at words like whoredom, we look at words like idolatry, when we look at this stuff as it resides in the Word, what we have to fully understand is this, is it would not be like just me walking into my dad's house and him saying, for no reason, I'm not your dad, you're not my son. The conversation would be something more like, you are honoring or treating somebody else or something else like your dad and not me. You are acting like somebody else's son and not mine. We've talked about in the past weeks that thing of idolatry being a huge deal to God. When we saw that in the beginning in Genesis, all the way through the end, in Revelation, we see that idolatry is really, really a problem. This is something that really gets under the Lord's skin, that when we start replacing Him for other stuff. And how many times do we do that? Now, I love my dad. Okay? But there was a period of time for like 12 years, my dad wasn't in my life, not necessarily by choice of my own. How many of us come from broken homes, from divorced parents? And when we do, man, we're looking for dad. And how many times in my adolescence did I place this thing up and said, well, I guess this thing will be my father. I guess this guy can kind of be a father figure to me, or whatever the case is. Now, the real question is, how many times do we do that with God? And how many times do we follow people that do that with God? We talked about, right, the OG, the original gangster Jeroboam. This dude ran a racket that was just gangster, right? He had a whole 10 tribes, the whole northern kingdom convinced that he busted out this little, handicraft thing, I don't know, something he picked up at Garden Ridge or something, this golden calf, and said, here is the God that brought you out of Egypt. This is your God. Man, and they were sold hook, line, and sinker. How many times do we just put dumb stuff in place of God? And then what do? We stand there and go, I don't understand why you would say you're not my God and I'm not your people. No, because I'm dumb. That's why, yes. So we see an inherent problem. And it always boils back down. Right? Always boils back down and comes to inherent problems. Sin. Sin. Like acne. I got it, you got it, we all got it, man. Sin. We cannot get away from what Paul said in Romans, that the wages of sin is death. Whether you're a believer or not a believer, whether you're a follower of Christ or not a follower of Christ, it's tough to look at and go, well, wait a second. We've been through half of these minor prophets already, and we're going, man, God, He brought judgment on this city and on that city, on this city and on that city, on Tyre, a little island out there in the Mediterranean. And it's like, well, wait a second. If you're walking around proclaiming and saying, I'm an atheist, I'm an anti-theist, I'm an agnostic, I'm okay, you're okay, everybody's okay, we worship, all leads us to the same God, right? It doesn't matter whether you believe or you don't believe. That does not change the fact that we are not all subject to God's law. But it also doesn't change the fact that we're all subject to God's love. Yeah, right on. Amen. It's good. Yeah. You got that right. So we always see that the minor prophets don't necessarily start out with a good message. And in this case, here we go. We got Hosea, and he's actually living this thing out. He's saying, people, you want to know what I'm talking about? Look at my boy Hosea, actually walking this out. And look at how hard it is for him. So, we get into chapter 2. Let's talk a little bit about chapter 2. Verse 1, it says, say to your brothers, you are my people, and to your sisters, you have received mercy. Plead with your mother. Plead, for she is not my wife, and I'm not her husband, that she put away her whoring from her face and the adultery from between her breasts. Man, he's getting down. He's talking about this is deep, deep heart issues. Deep heart issues. So, man, this is what I love about God, right? Just when we think we got God figured out, okay, Lord, I got you figured out. I know how you roll. We look at our relationship with God and we go, okay, we got father-child relationship. Okay? And then Jesus comes on the scene, right? He comes on the scene and says, oh, now we kind of got brother-sister, brother-brother relationship. We got this. And then God, it makes another illustration here. Bride-groom relationship. Jesus, man, bride-groom relationship, brother-sister relationship, brother-brother relationship, father-son relationship. Adopted children relationship. We went through the whole book of Ephesians, right? And we said, oh man, what are we? We're no longer strangers, we're no longer slaves, but we've been adopted in and grafted in to Jesus. So we see all these different relationships, and God is just bringing this out right here. And so when we look at the scope of relationship, in this case, the bride and the groom relationship, we look at the root of something that cuts deep in relationship, adultery. And the adultery from deep down in our heart. So God's looking at the scope of that. Okay? Now, I'll let you in on a secret. If Gomer was a prostitute when Hosea married her, as we're going to find out in later chapters, it's not like she just resigned that position. That was not the case. That was not the case. So we go on to verse 3. It says, "Lest I strip her naked and make her as in the day she was born, and make her like a wilderness, and make her like a parched land, and kill her with thirst. Upon her children also I will have no mercy, because they are children of whoredom. For their mother has played the whore. She has conceived them and acted shamefully. For she said, I will go up after my lovers, who will give me bread and my water, my wool, my flax, my oil, and my drink. Therefore I will hedge up her way with thorns, and I will build a wall against her, so that she cannot find her paths." This is really interesting in the sense that, again, when we go back to the relationship piece, right? Father-child relationship, husband-wife relationship. And when we start talking about taking God off of his pedestal and us trying to put other stuff, other things, TV shows, lust, greed for money, whatever, up on that pedestal that doesn't belong there, we start looking to those things to make provision. This whole section right here that he's talking about is provision. Who give me bread and my water, my wool, my flax, my oil, my drink. Man, sometimes we go, if I could just get that winning lottery ticket, I'd be set. Because we have a delusion in our mind that a winning lottery ticket will bring us all the cash we need to make full provision for us. When in reality, money runs out. Money loses value. Because we start looking for that thing to provide for us the things that God always intended to provide for us. I used to work with a guy who was really wealthy. The guy was a self-made millionaire. He was really, really, really wealthy. And we were in Southern California at the time, and he had, he had just bought a Ferrari and all this stuff at the time that later got stolen, but he bought this Ferrari and all this stuff, and he had done the whole kind of almost celebrity-like lifestyle, party, drinking, gone to AA, come back, reinvented himself, everything else. But this guy was sitting on tens of millions of dollars, and he was like 28 years old. But then his mom got sick with cancer. And he realized, he's like, man, how many millions of dollars? How much time? How many places can I fly her where they do treatment that we don't do in the U.S. and all this stuff? And I remember right before I left that job and we moved here to Atlanta, I remember talking to him and he's going, man, I think I'm looking for my money and my success to provide things for me that it just can't. And I said, well, brother, I think you're looking for Jesus, but that's none of my business. We have to fully understand idol worship, whoredom, adultery. We have to fully understand the implication of these things feeding our flesh and feeding our sin. And this is what God's bringing to the table here. So let's go on to verse 7. It says, she shall pursue her lovers, but not overtake them. She shall seek them, but shall not find them. Then she shall say, I will go and return to my first husband, for it was better for me then than now. And she did not know that it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, and the oil, and who lavished on her silver and gold, in which they use for Baal. This is, boy, you want to talk about digging deep, getting it, where it just really gets hard. God says, first thing is, I'm going to bring her into a dry desert place. So then we look at all this stuff that we look to, to give us provision. But it's God saying, listen, you think it was the winning lottery ticket that really gave you what it is that you needed? You really think it was your fame or your fortune or your status, your clout? But the entire time it was God saying, I provided all things for you. But in the time where we go into a dry desert place and that stuff kind of gets removed from us, Sometimes that we have to have that to wake up and open our eyes and see and look around us and go, man, is it not God making provision for me? Is it not God who is the center of this relationship? You know, I could stand here all day and tell you what a great husband I am. But don't go talk to Teddy. Ask her. Because I can only be so much husband. And I cannot be God. There's only so much we can provide and only so much we can do for ourselves. Because remember, the wages of our sin is death. So the more I work, man, the more I dig that hole. But we've got God here who's all about providing. We've got God here who's all about separating us. We've got a God here who's all about loving us. Verse 9, therefore I will take back my grain in its time, and my wine in its season. And I will take away my wool and my flax, which were to cover her nakedness. Now I will uncover her lewdness in the sight of her lovers, and no one shall rescue her out from my hand. The nakedness thing. Let's talk about that for a second. Yeah, Linda's like... Okay, let's go back. Let's take it back real old school. The Garden of Eden. Garden of Eden. Adam and Eve, they sin. They sin, right? Yeah. What's the first thing that happened? They opened their eyes and they realized that they were naked. They were naked. Is there anything wrong with being naked? No wrong with being naked. That's his place. Mm-hmm. Yep. What the nakedness represents is our shame. It doesn't have anything to do with us actually being naked. Yes, some of us shouldn't be naked. Nakedness represents the shame. And then Adam and Eve realized, and they had shame. So what do? They try to make some makeshift stuff and sew over fig leaves and over all their stuff and walk around in fig leaves and itching and all, right? Trying to cover our shame. Now, is this not an illustration right here when we look at the provision of what God gives us and we try to use those things to cover our shame? But the thing is that eventually the money runs out, right? The fame becomes dull. You know, new artist comes on the scene. He or she's the greatest thing ever and everything else. And then when the money starts running out and the next record deal doesn't go through and whatever else, now we start seeing their face plastered, you know, when you're standing in line at a grocery store on all the tabloids, so-and-so arrested, you know, drugs, and you got face tattoos and, you know, and going crazy, right? Because we take all that stuff that God provides us and we remove it, and then what are we left with? Ooh. Again, these are hard words. These are really, really hard words. But, yeah, you know, that's the other thing, man. We serve a God who keeps it real. He keeps it really real. We can only fake the funk for so long. And then God's going to keep it real. So let's jump down to verse 14 here in chapter 2. And let's talk about where this story turns around, where it starts to get good. In verse 14, he says, therefore, behold, I will allure her and bring her into the wilderness and speak tenderly to her. So we have all this stuff stripped away. We go into the wilderness. We go into the dry place that, you know, when I think of wilderness in this region of the country, I think of the desert. Now, when I was in the Marine Corps and stationed in the desert, I can tell you this, what's out in the desert. Lots of sand, lots of rocks, lots of creepy crawlies, lots of sun. Not a lot of water, not a lot of anything that sustains any kind of life. Right? You want to talk about being in a place feeling afraid because you don't realize how big the sky is until there's no trees or buildings to obscure the sky. Yeah, spend some time in the desert and you realize how small we are, how vulnerable we are. So we go into this place. Now all of us, this is again kind of a metaphoric thing, all of us have these desert places in our lives Right? Sometimes, we're in this kind of dry place. We're in a dry place with the church. We're in a dry place at work. We're in a dry place in this relationship. Well, we get all this stuff stripped away that's covering up the junk that we really need to deal with. God gives us an opportunity to do that. We always look at that as we go, like, hey man, how you doing? Man, I'm just making it. Just getting by. I'm in a dry place. No, yeah, Lord willing, the creek don't rise. I'm in a dry place with the Lord. I'm in a dry place with my wife. It's just, I'm making it. It's like, man, talk about a good time for us to stop and recognize and get on our face and seek the Lord. Okay, Lord, you've stripped away all of these distractions. You've stripped away all of this junk now. And we're afraid of that. Because we stop when we come to a place and go, okay, now here I am, I got to deal with myself. And I'm no good to deal with. But the great thing is that God doesn't leave us alone in that place, right? Because we always have the option to stop and say, okay, Lord, I'm done dealing with myself. Now it's time for you to deal with me. Much easier said than done. Much easier said than done. But we have the opportunity to do that, right? Because we don't serve a God who's like, oh, you messed up, you're done. That's it. So we look at what God does. Now, when he's saying her, in this case, is he talking about Gomer? He's talking about the entire nation of Israel. He's talking about an entire nation. And I love it. When we had our concert here a few weeks ago, Big Nate, the rapper, he was talking about God. He was saying, God is no respecter of persons. If God will do this for a nation, will he not do it for me? Will he not give me the opportunity? Verse 15. And it's there, in the wilderness, in the dry place. It's right, in the place that we don't want to be, the place that's hard. He says, and it's there I will give her vineyards and make the valley of Acre a door of hope. And there she shall answer as in the days of her youth, as at the time when she came out of the land of Egypt. The valley of Acre. Does that sound familiar to anybody? Anybody know what's significant about the valley of Acre? Huh? Trouble. Ooh, that's a lady that knows the word right there. Yeah. So last year this time when we were preaching through the series on Joshua's journey, all right, they leave Egypt, they come out into the desert, they cross over, they're getting ready to go into Jericho, right? The Israelites, they go into Jericho, they go ham, victory is the Lord's, they move on, next conquest is the city of Ai, Ai. They go there, and what happens? Joshua and the Israelite army get it handed to them. Handed to them. The word says, right, if you get back old school, in the King James, they're like, what happened, Joshua? He said, we were routed. Them dudes went gangster on us. 300 people lost. And Joshua's racking his brain going, what on earth happened? I don't understand. He takes us out of Egypt, takes us across the river twice. Jericho, we got that in the bag. We're just rolling deep with the Lord right now. What happened? What happened? Well, what had happened was that there was one guy in the camp who took gold and silver, right? After God said, leave the people, leave their stuff, don't even leave their critters, don't even eat that junk. Leave it. Destroy it all. And he took some of that, and what did he do? He dug under the sand and hid it under his tent. Because, right, so the moral of that whole sermon was our sin just doesn't affect us. When we have it buried, it affects the whole camp. All right? When that happened, that was in the Valley of Acre. Yep. And it was with a guy named Achan. But this is where God really sums it up, because he says, in that dry and desert place, I will make the valley of Achor a door of hope. Thank you, Lord. And that's where it turns around. Verse 16 he says, "In that day, declares the Lord, you will call me my husband, and I will no longer call you my Baal." Right? That my idol, that whatever junk, for I will remove the names of the Baals from her mouth, and they shall be remembered no more. And I shall make for them a covenant on that day with the beasts of the field, the birds of the heavens, and the creeping things of the ground, and I will abolish the bow, the sword, and war from the land, and I will make you lie down in safety. And I will betroth you to me forever. So when anybody says forever, it means forever. It is the Lord. It is the Lord. But he says here, I will make for you a door of hope. The key thing with that is that it's a door. Is that it's a door. Now, if we want to stay in the dry and the desert place with everything stripped away and our shame just hanging out, all kinds of loose and everything, we can stay there. Sometimes we do. We do stay there. We the self-punishment thing, people around us going, you don't deserve, whatever the case, and we stay there. But the thing is, God does not have a desire for us to stay there. God's desire for us is to be reconciled with Him because of His love for us. Not because of anything, certainly not because of anything that we've done, good or bad. But because of His grace, His mercy, His redemption, He said Himself. Here we see it again. We see it again in the Old Testament. Not that God said He's going to provide a way for salvation, that He Himself would be the salvation. Another foreshadowing of Christ coming to the cross. God does not leave us in our sin and in our mess. But we got to choose to not be there. Who says he stands at the door and knocks? Man, open the door. Open the door. He stands at the door and knocks. God here in the driest, most desolate place in our lives stops and He provides for us a door of hope. All we've got to do is walk through the door. I have the worship team come back up, you guys. Hosea. Oh, man. Hosea had it hard. He had it tough. That's for sure. Because he was having to live real time what God was representing to an entire nation. But let's go back again and look at this. If God will do this for all of Israel, we see that God does this also for Hosea and Gomer. And if He does it for them, He does it for us. Praise the Lord, man, yeah. We can stop and we can stay in that dry place, but we do not have to. I encourage you that you do not have to stay there. Jesus stands at the door and He knocks, and all we have to do is open it. It doesn't make it easy. It doesn't make it comfortable. It doesn't make it familiar. But He does promise that He will make it loving. He does promise that He'll provide for us. He does promise that we will live. And that's good news, that we will live. We will get through it. We will roll through it. He says, I am with you even to the end of the age. That's good news, church.